Well, more Russiagate, everybody. We're back on the train of blaming Russia for absolutely everything, this time for maybe some hiccups on what's going on with the vaccines and maybe with some of the reporting with the vaccines. But here's this article from the Wall Street Journal. It says Russian disinformation campaign aims to undermine confidence in Pfizer, other COVID-19 vaccines, U.S. officials say. Dun, dun, dun. The Russians are at it again, everybody. Can you believe it? They're actually trying to get you to not take the vaccine, according to the U.S. intelligence officials. It says right here, Russian intelligence agencies have mounted a campaign to undermine confidence in Pfizer Inc. and other Western vaccines using online publications that in recent months have questioned the vaccine's development and safety, U.S. officials said. An official with the State Department's Global Engagement Center, which monitors foreign disinformation efforts, identified 4 publications that said that he said had served as fronts for Russian intelligence. He says the websites played up the vaccine's risk of side effects, questioned their efficiency, and said the U.S. had rushed the Pfizer vaccine through the approval process, amongst other false or misleading claims. Okay, so let's just stop and break this down for a second here. So the U.S. U.S. officials are saying that there were at least 4 publications that were based in Russia that were reporting on the vaccines here in the United States, Western vaccines, their efficiency, and maybe some of their, maybe some side effects that were being reported. So these news organizations, so let's just get this clear. 4 publications, what is that? That is news organizations. So 4 Russian news organizations actually did their job and reported news. But because it came from Russia, that makes it Russian disinformation. Do you see how this works now? So these are Russian disinformation campaigns because these are Russian media outlets. So the Russian officials, when you go on and read this story, the Russian officials actually then go on to say, wait a minute here. So they're like, this isn't Russian disinformation. This is just Russian news outlets. Yeah, maybe our government funds these news outlets here and there, just like the U.S. government and other Western governments give money to certain news organizations. They said, if this is Russian disinformation, then every piece of news that has come out on CNN, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, you name it, anything that's come out questioning Sputnik 5, questioning the Russians, questioning what's going on in Russia, would then be what? Western disinformation? American disinformation campaigns? Or is it just your news organizations doing what news organizations do, and they're reporting on news, and they're speculating, and they're trying to get viewers and subscribers? Maybe that's what they're doing. So the Russians are saying, this isn't Russian disinformation. We don't have any state directive telling these news organizations to go out there and sow disinformation with these American vaccines. We're not doing that. They're just reporting on what's really going on. Now, here later on in this article, let me see if I can find it here. But it actually admits this. This article says, well, okay, it says they're not lying when they're reporting these things. They said they're not lying, but still, they're really pointing out the bad, and they're not really talking about the good. So let me see if I can find right here. It says the State Department had previously not gone so far as to say these outlets were controlled or guided by Russian intelligence agencies, an assertion that generally relies on U.S. classified intelligence. So first they're not saying, okay, well, maybe they're not, yeah, they might be Russian publications, but they're not, okay, maybe they're not really directed by Russia. And then it says, says right here, social media accounts affiliated with the 4 websites. So, yes, of course, news organizations have Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts and whatnot. It says social media accounts affiliated with the 4 websites have largely been removed from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Pinterest, though some non-English language accounts remain active earlier this year. That's alarming, first and foremost, that all of these platforms, these social media platforms, are removing anything that they consider to be Russian disinformation, which would be Russian news outlets. Are they removing the BBC? Are they removing Sky News? Are they removing, all of these various news outlets that come from other countries? Or are they just targeting Russians in particular? So it goes on to say here that highlighting reports in the international media, a January article in Newsfront played up the risk that a person who receives the Pfizer or Moderna Inc. vaccines could contract Bell's palsy, in which facial muscles are paralyzed, while a February article focused on a man in California that it said tested positive for COVID-19 after receiving the Pfizer vaccination. In each case, the Russian outlets were repeating actual news reports. Okay, they were repeating actual news reports, but overlooking contrary information about the general safety of the vaccine. Numerous studies and real-world data have shown the Food and Drug Administration approved vaccines to be safe and effective. They're not approved by the FDA, by the way. And hospitalizations and deaths have begun to plummet in places like Israel, where shots have been widely administered, though a small number of side effects have been reported. Okay, let's break that down for a second. So they're saying right here that in each case, the Russian outlets were repeating actual news. Okay, so they weren't lying, even though this is supposedly what they're calling Russian disinformation. Does that not alarm you? That should alarm all of us, that they're claiming something is disinformation, but then in the same breath turning around and saying, well, they didn't lie, but we just didn't like that they overemphasized this. We didn't like that they paid more attention to this than the other things. Or they should have said that, yeah, this person died shortly after taking the vaccine, but it probably wasn't the vaccine, right? So they just don't like the narrative or the spin, but they're telling you they didn't lie. These are actual news reports. But somehow that now actual news is disinformation. You see how alarming that is? So they say in each case, the Russian outlets were repeating actual news reports, but overlooking contrary information about the general safety of the vaccine, saying that numerous studies and real-world data have shown the Food and Drug Administration approved vaccines to be safe and effective. Sure, that's true of FDA approved vaccines, except guess what? None of the COVID vaccines are FDA approved. Not one of them. They are authorized for emergency use. That's different. That is different. That is not FDA approved. FDA approved is an approval process that is rigorous and long. It takes years. This is one of the complaints many people have about the FDA, that it takes too long to get FDA approval for a variety of different things, because the FDA wants to do long-term studies to find out long-term side effects. They don't approve anything unless they know long-term side effects. We don't know the long-term side effects. We don't know. It hasn't been around long enough. We still don't even know if when you get these vaccines, if you can contract COVID and spread it. We still don't know. Today on CNN, I was watching Sanjay Gupta, and he was saying, we don't know. We think and we hope, but we don't know. We don't have enough data yet because they haven't been out long enough for us to collect that data. And they certainly didn't go through the rigorous trial process before unleashing it to the American public to find out, right? So these are not actually approved. These are authorized for emergency use. That is different. That is the FDA saying, we think that the disease is worse than the cure, and that this cure, though we don't know how well it works just yet, we don't know all the long-term side effects, we really don't know a whole lot about it, we think it's still worth the risk. So that's why it's approved for emergency authorization. But it is still an experimental medicine, and it is still risky. But they're not relaying that to the American people. They're just saying, take it, do it, it's good for you, and they don't know. So it says right here that, so it says that and the deaths have begun to plummet in places like Israel, where shots have been widely administered, though a small number of side effects have been reported. We're going to get to those side effects. I'm really kind of risking it talking about this here tonight. But okay, hospitalizations and deaths were already beginning to plummet. We actually won't know how effective these vaccines are until the fall, really. Because when they started to really administer these vaccines out into the public, once they started doing sort of mass vaccinations, we were already seeing a decrease in the numbers. The numbers were already going down. The hospitalizations were already going down. It had nothing to do with the shots. That was already happening. So we actually won't know how effective they are at stopping or slowing the spread, or even slowing or stopping hospitalizations. We won't know, and we may never know, to be honest with you. If we've already reached a level of herd immunity, which I suspect we may have, when it waved around the first time back a year ago, it only hit the most populated cities in America, the most populated East Coast cities in America. And then it sort of waved through in the summer. It got all the areas that people were hunkering down indoors with circulating air conditioning. And then this fall, this winter, we started really seeing it kind of hit all around the country. So I don't know if there's really even a crevice of the country left where this virus hasn't swept through and really wreaked havoc. So there is a possibility that we've reached a level of herd immunity on our own, in which case we will never know how effective these vaccines are. Because what'll happen is the virus will just do what the virus is doing right now naturally, which is going away and declining everywhere. And then in the fall, if it comes back, it might not be so bad because a lot of people have already caught it. And it might just be something similar more to the regular influenza. That's very possible. So we won't. But of course, what'll happen? They're going to say, well, that's because it was the vaccine that did it. And then they're going to have to reconcile with areas of the country and really areas of the world that didn't get so many vaccinations, but they did get the virus and it waved through the population, but they didn't have access to the vaccines and they're not seeing a big resurgence. That's really when we'll know. Or maybe they will see a big resurgence and the areas that are vaccinated are safe and sound, in which case we'll know. We won't know until all of that happens. And then they're also now saying, well, we don't know because of all these different variants, right? So the variant comes around, now they're saying that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are really ineffective to some of these variants. So right here in this article, when they're saying that, well, these Russian disinformation articles are, they're fake news and disinformation because even though they pointed to all of these things, they're not talking about how safe they actually are because they're approved, which they're not. And they're not talking about how it's decreasing the virus all around in areas where they've got the mass vaccination campaigns. Well, that's because they also don't know that. Nobody knows that. We don't know that. And they say, though a small number of side effects have been reported. We're going to go over that. It goes on to say here, to date, millions of people have been vaccinated with our vaccine following the endorsement of regulators in multiple countries, said Pamela Eisel, a spokeswoman for Pfizer, who added that individuals who have questions should consult the Center for Disease Control and Prevention website or their healthcare provider. Okay, so I did that. I wanted to see for myself exactly what are they talking about, because so what they're claiming the Russians have done is the Russians are spreading misinformation, disinformation, in fact, not just misinformation, disinformation. So they're trying to gaslight you into being afraid of these vaccines. But they're giving you facts. They're telling you actual news. But don't be afraid of what they're actually telling you. So the thing is that what the Russians were doing was that they were saying, well, there's a lot of side effects with these vaccines. They're mRNA vaccines. We don't know a lot about this technology. They've rushed it out there. We don't know anything really about the side effects of these types of vaccines. And that is all accurate. That's factually true. We don't know a lot about the mRNA vaccines. And the Russian vaccine, Sputnik 5, is an adenovirus vaccine. It's a different type of vaccine. They took a virus. I believe what Sputnik 5 took was a cold virus, a common cold virus, but an extremely rare one. That might have been the Johnson & Johnson one, because that's a similar sort of technology. AstraZeneca is a similar one too, but AstraZeneca used a chimp virus that humans don't ever get. And what they do is they take that virus that is a real virus and they manipulate it to make it to where when they inject you with it, your body would become immune not only to the virus that they injected you with, like the ape virus that you're probably never going to get, or this not so common cold virus. You would be immune to that virus because your body would get exposure to it and you would build up antibodies. But also you would become immune to COVID because they sequenced it in a certain way to make it to where your body would recognize the spike proteins from the coronavirus. So that is what an adenovirus does. And that is also a type of vaccine that really isn't widely used. We've only really used that in the Ebola vaccine. We've never really used that type of technology in any other type of vaccine, although that technology theoretically and in tests has been around for about 5 decades, unlike the mRNA vaccine, which every time they tried to test mRNAs, it didn't really go all that well. And then there hasn't been a lot of testing of mRNAs, even though the science is, when you read about it, it's sound. The science is sound, but something can look good on paper, but in actuality, in practice, you never really know. And that's kind of what's going on with those. And that's what the Russians are pointing out, which is the truth. They're telling you the truth. They're not actually spreading disinformation. They're just letting you know the reality of it. And they're saying, hey, you should trust the Sputnik 5. Now, what the Wall Street Journal and what these U.S. intelligence organization, what the U.S. officials are claiming about this Russian disinformation is they're trying to say that the Russians are doing this for two reasons. They're doing it because they want fewer Americans vaccinated, right? Because they're sinister and they're essentially at war with us. We've never ended this war with Russia for God knows why, even though they're not the country we should be paying that much attention to. But, the U.S. intelligence loves to have a boogeyman named Russia. So they're claiming that Russia's just trying to make America sick by making it to where we don't take the vaccine. And secondly, they're doing it because they're wanting to promote Sputnik 5 and they're wanting other countries to buy Sputnik 5 and not the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccines. They are competing economically for market share for vaccine. And that's why they're spreading this misinformation. Russia, Russia, Russia. So that is their claim on all of this. Now, the Russians, though, and then also what they're claiming is, well, they're not lying to us, right? But still, they're not giving us the accurate information. So anyway, I wanted to look up what the accurate information was in regards to the numbers. I had actually gone over these numbers because the Russians were talking about how many people had adverse side effects. And this Wall Street Journal article told us that if we had any questions, we could consult. Well, the Pfizer rep said if we had any questions, we could consult the Center for Disease Control. Okay, so I did that. And we found out here that as of March 3rd, the CDC received reports of 97,458 adverse events with 1,381 deaths in the people who had taken at least one dose of the authorized, we should say, COVID-19 vaccines. So those were the statistics that were reported through their vaccine. They've got a website where people can report adverse effects with the vaccine. And these are the statistics. So the Russians were really just saying this is what the information was, according to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, unless we're going to call them disinformation as well. Now, when you break this number down, I just want to point this out, that this is based on a total number of doses being given. And the doses that were given, I believe at this point, according to this, with March, there was like 78 million doses. So it was 78 million doses, 1,381 deaths, 97,458 adverse events. Now, the adverse events can range from typically, if it's an adverse reaction enough to report to the website, to the CDC, it's got to be somewhat severe. So maybe not life-threatening, but maybe you got a really bad temperature, fever, chills. Maybe you did get some paralyzation. I think I told you guys last week that I was in Idaho and I was in a bar in Idaho because they're pretty much open in Idaho now. And I was sitting next to my dad's friend who had received the vaccine, and he told me everybody in his family got the vaccine, and he was sitting there saying, no, it was great. No, I had no problems with vaccine. Yeah, everybody in my family got vaccinated, and my daughters got vaccinated. My wife got vaccinated. I got vaccinated. My nieces got vaccinated. No, everybody was fine. There were no problems. Oh, except my niece. She did get paralyzed on one half of her body, but that was it. Otherwise, no issues. And he says it like this. He says it like it was nothing. Oh, well, my niece got, paralyzed on one half of her face. But, other than that, no, everybody was fine. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. You're telling me you know somebody who actually ended up with that side effect. And, oh, yeah, my niece, she's better now. It went away, I think. This is how we saw. I think, it got better. It got better. But who knows how much better does it get? Does it go is it just a temporary side effect that goes away 100%? You're okay? Or do you have residual kind of droopy face for the rest of your life? I mean, what? We don't know. But his niece had that side effect. Somebody I know. So He says that that happened for about a week. So these are the types of things that the Russians are reporting on, and now I'm telling you about them as well. Now, I want to point out that with the influenza vaccine, so the regular vaccine, the flu vaccine, people get that shot every year, right? The flu shot. Typically, deaths are 1 in a million, and that's pretty standard with all FDA-approved vaccines. It's about 1 in a million. That's the standard. Now, we've had 78 million shots given as of March 3rd. That would mean 78 deaths if it was 1 in a million. But instead, they have nearly 1,400. So that's a big difference. And they've had 97,458 adverse events. And with influenza, that breaks down, by the way, to about 1 in every 50,000. So 1 in 50,000 people have 1 in 50,000 people die. The deaths that were reported was 1 in 50,000. That's more than 1 in a million. And of the adverse events, it's more like 1 in 700. So you're looking at 1 in 700 chance that if you get the shot, you're going to have some sort of really bad adverse event. Now, in my life, of the people I know, my sister had a pretty adverse reaction, but it was at her age survivable. It would not have maybe, it's questionable whether or not it would have been survivable for somebody much older than her. She ended up with 105, 106 degree temperature at one point. She did both rounds of the vaccine. She got very sick for about 24 to 48 hours each time. And the temperature was about 105, 106 degrees. That's really high. I don't know if somebody who's very frail, how they would do with that. My sister's 50, so it was a bit better, so I guess she was able to get through it, but something to consider. But these are the things that we're not at all hearing about in the news here in the United States. So the Russians are talking about it and they're saying, well, this is Russian disinformation, even though it's actually factual, but we're not really hearing about these events at all. We're not hearing about the events in Spain where it was 25% of a nursing home did not survive the vaccine, so they kind of halted it there. Germany's halted some of the vaccines for certain age groups, certain brands of the vaccine. We're getting all of these reports from around the world, but we're not hearing about that at all here in the United States. Instead, they're just saying to us, this is perfectly safe. And if you don't feel comfortable taking it, then you are an anti-vaxxer. If you're not comfortable, then there's something wrong with you. How dare you actually read these stats that the CDC is putting out? How dare you you're just believing Russian misinformation, Russian disinformation, because, we're under attack. We're basically at war with the Russians. So, I just wanted to kind of share this with you guys of what's really going on here. They're, Russia-gating us all over again, saying that it's Russia. Any negative report you're reading about these vaccines, it's not real. Okay, it's real, but that's not. But it's Russian disinformation. This is what they're saying to us. So something to really keep in mind. But again, I am not at all an anti-vaxxer. I say this is a very personal decision, very individual. I am glad that the CDC has now come out with their guidelines. One of the things that really had me breathing a sigh of relief today was when the CDC came out with their guidelines and they said those who've been vaccinated can now safely mingle with other people, small groups. Maybe they can go visit their children who are not vaccinated, and they can be indoors and maskless. That to me was a good sign that they came out with that particular piece of information today, particularly because what that means is many of you are afraid that they're going to be pushing this on everybody, that they're going to force it on everybody. And there might, I don't know if the government will, there might be your employer that does, there might be little groups around here and there that try to push, you must have the vaccine in order to come back to work but I don't know how they're going to be able to control that because I think people could just forge their way through that so easily in this country. But to me, it was a good sign that they said you could mingle with people who have not been vaccinated, that they didn't go down the road of everybody must be if you want to get together. If you want to have a little family gathering, everybody has to be vaccinated. They didn't say that today. What they said was the most vulnerable, you need to be vaccinated. And if you're around, you can be around low risk, unvaccinated people, maskless indoors, no problem. That's a good sign. That means we can have maybe a normal Easter this year with our families and small gatherings. I know that myself and my boyfriend, we will be spending it with his family, his parents, and his grandmother who are getting vaccinated. We're not in a high risk category. So for us, we don't feel like we need to get it, but the older folks in the family want to feel like, they definitely want to go get it. So then that means that the CDC is now saying that we can all get together as a family, and it's not pushing that on us. So I think that's a really good thing for those of you who are very afraid of that, the being pushed on it. And I do believe that this is a very personal decision. You should know all the facts. There is nothing wrong with knowing all the facts. You're not an anti-vaxxer or believing in Russian disinformation to know all the facts. I just think it's important to know so you can make an educated decision about your own health going forward. And, and there's a lot of other things to talk about in regards to this. There was more a study coming out saying that the vaccines were not effective against the new strains. They're saying that a new lab study showed that the mRNA vaccines in particular are not very effective against the variant first found in South Africa. According to this article here, they're saying that that it is significantly, in fact, the 12.4 times lower of effectiveness for Moderna and 10.3 times lower for Pfizer. So, again, that's going to make it difficult. But I don't mean to spread some Russian disinformation. Which organization did this come from? Oh, Business Insider. I think we're safe, right? It wasn't RT, so I think we're okay. It was Business Insider who told us that. So it's not Russian disinformation. But boy, they never stop with that, do they?